My parents kicked me out right before my SATs just so my entitled sister could have room for her friends to stay over for her wedding. When I asked them for help, they told me to go live on the streets. So, I sent that exact message to her fiancé and his family, and now everything's in chaos because the groom just called off the wedding. I'm 17, and I've been working hard for months to prepare for my SATs. But my family? They're the absolute worst. Out of nowhere, they decided I had to leave the house and go stay with my aunt in the suburbs. Why? Because my sister, Melissa, is getting married in 2 weeks and wants her friends to stay at our place. I still don't get why she couldn't just book them a hotel room like every other guest. Sure, it would have cost her some money, but given that it's her wedding, she could have handled it. Not to mention, our parents are already paying for a ton of things. Covering accommodations wouldn't have been that big of a deal. The worst part? My parents didn't even give me a heads up. They dropped this bombshell on me the night before her friends were scheduled to fly in. I was told to clear out of my room by the next evening. Less than 24 hours to figure out where to go. I tried reasoning with them, pointing out that 7 people crammed into one room was unreasonable anyway, so why not let them stay in the living room or the guest room? But no, apparently, that would be impolite. According to them, it wouldn't be right for my sister's friends to sleep in a common area while I got to have a whole room to myself. They even gave me a lecture on hospitality for guests I didn't even know were coming until the last minute. I also suggested that maybe some of them could stay with Melissa and her fiancé, Jack, since they have their own apartment. But my parents shot that down too. Their excuse? They're already dealing with enough stress from the wedding. Oh, but I guess shoving me out of my own home right before a major exam isn't stressful at all, right? I tried every possible way to convince them, but they wouldn't budge. Melissa had promised her friends a place to stay, and now I was just supposed to deal with it. Naturally, I wasn't okay with this. I refused to go, especially because my aunt's house was the worst possible place for me to stay before the SATs. She's eccentric, to put it nicely. She doesn't believe in the internet, so there's no Wi-Fi, which would completely mess up my study plans. I told my parents that I needed online resources to prepare, but they dismissed it, saying I could just take my books. As if that was enough. And it wasn't just about studying. My SAT testing center was nowhere near my aunt's place. Traveling from there would take way too long, and I couldn't afford to be late on such an important day. I even offered to move into the living room myself if that's what it took, but my parents weren't having it. They were dead set on kicking me out. When I said I wasn't leaving, they straight up threatened to throw all my stuff onto the street if I didn't go willingly. So, I did something they didn't see coming. I sent a message to Jack, Melissa's fiancé, and his family, explaining exactly what was happening. I told them how I was being forced out just so my sister's friends could crash at our house, even though my SATs were coming up. And guess what? That set off an absolute firestorm. Jack was furious. Apparently, he had no idea Melissa was treating me like this. The whole thing escalated fast, and now, the wedding is officially off. And honestly, I have no regrets. That was it. There was no point arguing anymore. A couple of hours later, I had basically given up and started packing my things. My parents acted like I had finally come to my senses and told me they were proud that I was making the right choice for the family. Then they casually mentioned that I needed to call my aunt and ask if she'd even be okay with me staying there. That's when it hit me. They hadn't even bothered to check with her first. They just expected me to figure it all out on my own. That was my breaking point. I completely lost it and started yelling at them. How could they just throw me out without even making sure I had a place to go? Their response: "It's not our responsibility to take care of you anymore. You're almost an adult, and you need to start handling things yourself." I was stunned. I was 17, not an adult, not even close. And even if I were 18, they were still my parents. They still had a responsibility to me, whether they liked it or not. I was furious, so instead of leaving, I started unpacking. That's when they lost it and started yelling back, telling me that I had no choice because they had already promised Melissa that her friends would stay over. Since they had assured her that they'd be well taken care of, that apparently meant kicking me out of my own room. I tried, one last time, to make them understand that my SATs were far more important than accommodating Melissa's friends. As my parents, they should have cared more about my future instead of bending over backward for my sister, like they always did. But they didn't want to hear it. It was like talking to a brick wall. At that point, I knew arguing with them was pointless, so I decided to try my last option, Melissa herself. Now, we've never been close. In fact, we don't even like each other. But I thought that, for once, maybe she'd be willing to talk to our parents and help me out, just this one time. I wasn't asking for much. I just needed to stay in my own home for a few more days until my SATs were over. So I called her. But instead of listening, she told me to put her on speaker. Then, in the most smug and heartless tone, she made it crystal clear. She had already promised her friends they could stay, and she wasn't about to break that promise. She didn't care about my SATs, didn't care if I had nowhere to go, didn't care about anything except making sure her friends were accommodated. And if I couldn't find another place to stay, her exact words, "Go live on the streets if you want, I don't care. I just want you out." And she hung up. I think that was the moment I truly realized I wasn't really part of this family. The fact that my parents just stood there in silence, not saying a single word in my defense, confirmed it. They didn't care about me at all. That was the final straw. Without another word, I grabbed my bags and left. I went to a friend's house, which, of course, wasn't ideal. I felt like a burden, no matter how much they reassured me that I wasn't. Their family was kind enough to let me stay as long as I needed because they understood how messed up my situation was. And honestly, that kindness meant more to me than anything my own family had ever given me. It's been 4 days since I left home, and yesterday, I finally took the SAT. Thankfully, despite everything I had been going through, it went pretty well. But after the test, when I got back, I finally allowed myself to process everything that had happened. Up until that point, I had been running on autopilot, pushing aside all my emotions so I could focus on scoring well. I didn't let myself dwell on how hurt and betrayed I felt because I needed all my energy to stay sharp for the test. But now that it was over, all those feelings I had buried started flooding back. The more I thought about how my family had treated me, the angrier I became. It was just so unfair. There was absolutely no valid reason for me to be kicked out of the house. Even if they didn't want to give me my room, I could have easily stayed in the living room. But for whatever reason, they just didn't want me there. That realization stung more than anything. Feeling humiliated and frustrated, I decided to reach out to Jack, Melissa's fiancé. At first, I didn't do it with the intention of ruining anything for her. I just felt like he deserved to know what kind of person he was marrying and what kind of family he was becoming a part of. I had no clue that my message would set off a chain reaction that would turn everything upside down. The wedding was just a week away, but this morning, my parents informed me that everything was in complete chaos because Jack had called it off, and they knew it was my fault. Apparently, after reading my message, Jack confronted Melissa about it. Instead of trying to lie or downplay the situation, she straight up admitted that she had forced our parents to kick me out just so her friends could stay at our house. Like any reasonable person, Jack was furious. He couldn't understand why I had to be thrown out of my home, especially at such a crucial time in my life, right before the SATs. He pointed out the same solutions I had suggested earlier, like me staying in the living room, some of her friends staying with them, or just booking a hotel. But Melissa brushed off all of his concerns with weak excuses. And then, she finally admitted the truth. She didn't want me around simply because she found me annoying. That was it. That was the whole reason she put me through all this. She knew she and her friends would be in and out of the house, and she just didn't want to have to see me. My parents were fully on board with her decision, which made it even worse. When Melissa said that out loud, Jack completely lost it. They got into a huge fight, with him calling her selfish and heartless. He told her that he couldn't believe she would go to such lengths just to get rid of her own sibling. He even demanded that she apologize to me and find a way to make things right. But Melissa flat out refused. She said she didn't like me and didn't feel like I deserved an apology. That was the breaking point. Jack told her he couldn't be with someone like that and called off the wedding. And just like that, everything she had been planning for fell apart because of her own selfishness. After their fight, Jack didn't even contact Melissa. He just left the house last night and never came back. At first, she didn't take it seriously. She thought he'd cool off and return. But when he still hadn't shown up by morning, she completely lost it. That's when my parents called me. According to them, since I was the one who caused all this drama, it was my responsibility to talk to Jack and fix it. But honestly, what did they expect me to say? I had only told him the truth. Was I supposed to go back and lie now, pretend it was all made up? That wasn't happening. I told my parents straight up that even if I could do that, I wouldn't. Because in my opinion, Jack had done the right thing. And besides, it wasn't my job to fix my sister's relationship. If she wanted to save her wedding, that was on her. And let's not forget, when I needed her help, she told me to go live on the streets. So why exactly should I help her now? My family has always treated me terribly, but I never had anywhere else to go. I'm not particularly close to anyone outside of them, and my grandparents live out of state. On top of that, I've always been the kind of person who hates asking for help. Even showing up at my friend's house and asking if I could stay with her was incredibly difficult for me. And despite everything they've put me through, I had never told anyone just how badly my parents and Melissa treated me. But now that I had finally found the courage to speak up, there was no way I was going to back down and help fix Melissa's mess. In fact, I told my parents that not only was I not going to talk to Jack, but I was also going to make sure that everyone knew exactly what kind of person Melissa was, and just how awful they had been to me. I told them I was planning to post everything on social media and let the world know the real reason why the wedding was called off. That's when everything changed. Suddenly, my parents were begging me not to do it. Melissa and Jack hadn't officially announced anything yet, and if I went public, she would definitely find a way to blame them for letting me know that Jack had left. They were desperate to keep things quiet and even offered to promise me anything if I stayed silent. Honestly, I found it pathetic. They didn't care about me when they kicked me out. They didn't care about me when I was struggling before my SATs. But now, because they didn't want Melissa to be mad at them, suddenly they were willing to bargain? Still, I wasn't sure if posting about this was the right move. Would I be the asshole if I exposed everything before Melissa had a chance to make her own statement? Update 1. After thinking it over, I decided not to make any posts. I read through the comments and realized that I just didn't want to get more entangled in this mess. Posting about it online would only drag me further into the drama, and I didn't want to deal with that. Instead, I chose to remove myself from the situation completely. I blocked my parents and Melissa because, at this point, I want nothing to do with them. I finally decided to talk to my paternal grandparents about everything. Even though we don't see each other often, I've always felt closer to them than to the rest of my family. Now that I've made up my mind to start speaking up, because staying silent has never helped me, I thought they were the best people to begin with. So, I told them everything. Not just about what happened recently, but also about the way I've been treated in the past. I don't really want to get into every detail, but let's just say there have been plenty of moments that made me realize I was never a priority in my family. Melissa has made it very clear that she can't stand me, and now, after everything that's happened, there's no doubt about it. But honestly, she's always been this way. This latest incident was just more extreme than usual. The truth is, we've never liked each other, and I've always known that. What I didn't fully expect was just how deep my parents' favoritism ran. I always knew they preferred Melissa. She was their golden child, their darling daughter. But I never thought they'd go as far as they did. It was one thing to favor her, but another thing entirely to throw me out of the house before my SATs just to accommodate her friends. That level of cruelty still shocks me. For years, I never spoke about this to anyone. I kept quiet because I didn't think I was close enough to anyone to bring it up, and honestly, I hate asking people for help. But after seeing how Jack, who isn't even related to me, immediately cut ties with Melissa when he found out the truth, I realized I had been wrong to keep everything bottled up. If even he could recognize how terrible my family was and walk away, maybe my grandparents and others would too. So, I finally opened up about my life to my grandparents. And their reaction? Exactly what I had hoped for. Since they live out of state, I had to tell them everything over the phone. My grandfather was furious. He told me that they would be flying in by the end of the week and that they were going to make sure I was taken care of. He didn't say much about their exact plans, but he made it clear that they were not okay with how my parents had treated me or how Melissa had behaved. My grandmother, on the other hand, was heartbroken. She kept apologizing over and over again, saying that she felt like she had failed as a mother. According to her, if my dad had been raised to be a good man, he would never have treated his own daughter this way. And then, in the middle of all of this, I had a weird realization. For the longest time, I had secretly wondered if I was even my parents' biological child. The way they treated me made me feel like I didn't belong, like I was some outsider they were forced to tolerate. At least if I had been adopted, it would have explained why they were so cold toward me. But now, after talking to my grandparents, I know that's not the case. I'm their biological daughter. And somehow, that makes it even worse, because now I have absolutely no explanation for why they've always hated me. I've never really cared why Melissa doesn't like me. I always just assumed it was because she's an insecure brat who constantly needs to be the center of attention. The idea of her younger sister getting even a fraction of the attention she craves probably drove her crazy, so she made sure to put me down in her own ways. And, of course, my parents didn't just allow it, they actively enabled it. I have no doubt that she's furious right now. Jack leaving her over a fight that, technically, started because of me must be eating her up inside. If I had never spoken to him, he never would have known the truth, and they'd be getting married this week as planned. But instead, everything is a complete disaster, and I know she's blaming me for it. As far as I know, neither she nor Jack has put out an official statement about the wedding yet. I've blocked her, but I haven't blocked Jack, and I still follow him on social media. If he decides to say anything publicly, I'll see it. For now, I'm just waiting for my grandparents to arrive. Hopefully, once they're here, I can finally stop feeling like a burden to my friend and her family. They've been nothing but kind to me, and when I told my friend I'd be leaving by the end of the week, she actually seemed a little disappointed. But at least we'll still see each other at school, and she understands that this had to happen eventually. I'll miss her, and I'll really miss her parents too. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly wanted somewhere, which is a bittersweet feeling in itself. Update 2. My grandparents finally made it here. They had to wait until the end of the week because they had a lot of work to wrap up first, not knowing how long they'd be staying. A lot has happened in the past few days. It's been 4 days since my last update, and yesterday, Melissa and Jack finally broke their silence. They both posted on social media, saying that they had decided to postpone the wedding indefinitely. Their names were signed at the bottom of the post, which means they must have talked things through and come to that decision together. Honestly, I was surprised. Last I heard, the wedding was completely called off. But I guess it makes sense. Melissa and Jack have been together since middle school, and their relationship has always been on and off. They've had plenty of rough patches over the years, but somehow, they always found a way back to each other. Maybe that's what they're trying to do now. And honestly, good for them. Jack never responded to my message. The only reason I even knew about his fight with Melissa and his decision to leave was through my parents. But from what I know of him, he's a good guy. If Melissa somehow convinces him to stay, that's probably the best thing that could happen for her. As for my grandparents, they arrived last night and came straight to my friend's house from the airport. The first thing they did was thank her parents for letting me stay with them and taking such good care of me. Seeing them in person was such a relief. And now that they're here, they've decided it's time to tell my maternal grandparents everything as well. I'm not particularly close to my mom's parents, so I wasn't sure how they'd react. But after thinking it through, I realized they deserved to know the truth too. So last night, we finally called them up and told them everything. How my parents have been treating me for years, how Melissa has always made me feel like I don't belong, and how they went as far as kicking me out of the house right before my SATs. Now, for the first time in my life, my entire extended family knows the truth. And honestly, it feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. After my grandparents arrived last night, they thanked my friend and her parents for everything they had done for me. By then, I had already packed up, so I left with them and moved into the hotel where they were staying. I even have my own room here, which is pretty nice. Once we settled in, they called my maternal grandparents and told them everything. Their reaction was exactly what I expected. They were furious. Unfortunately, they can't fly out to see me right now because my grandmother is extremely sick. She can barely move, so traveling isn't an option for her. I completely understand. Still, we had a long discussion over the phone, and all of us came to a decision. I wasn't going back home. Ever since I left and blocked my parents, they haven't even made the slightest effort to reach out or check on me. The only time they contacted me was when they were furious about the chaos I caused by telling Jack the truth. After that, silence. It was painfully clear that I wasn't wanted there. My grandparents suggested a plan. Since I still have a year left in high school, I could continue living with my friend's family if they were open to it. Then, once I graduated, I would move in with my paternal grandparents until I started college. I thought it was a great idea. This morning, my grandparents and I sat down with my friend's parents and discussed it with them. They were more than happy to take me back in until I finished high school. My grandparents also offered to cover all my expenses to repay them for everything they had done. But my friend's parents, being the incredibly kind people they are, refused to take any money. They said they were well off enough and didn't see the need for reimbursement. My grandparents insisted, though, wanting to show their gratitude in some way. Honestly, I couldn't be happier with this arrangement. Getting to live with my best friend feels like a dream, especially knowing how much she genuinely cares about me. Even in the past, when I used to vent to her about how my parents treated me, she always told me that I could come stay with her anytime, no questions asked. And now, I know she truly meant it. Not everyone is lucky enough to have a friend like that. At this point, she's as good as a real sister to me. Definitely better than Melissa, that's for sure. I'm beyond grateful that my grandparents stepped in and made all of this happen. They're even taking care of the legal aspects now and are currently getting in touch with my parents as I write this. I'll keep you all updated on what happens next. Update 3. Hey everyone. It's been a couple of weeks since my last update, and I can finally say that things have changed for the better. For starters, I'm now officially living with my best friend, and I have zero contact with my parents. After being confronted by my grandparents, they decided to sign away their parental rights, which means my grandparents now have primary custody of me. So, I'll be staying here to finish high school, and then I'll move in with my grandparents. None of my grandparents want anything to do with my parents anymore, which is honestly the best outcome I could have hoped for. It serves them right for treating me the way they did all these years. Another huge relief? I don't have to stress about college anymore. Before this, I was convinced I'd have to take out student loans or work my way through college to afford tuition. But my grandparents have reassured me that they'll cover all my expenses, so I have nothing to worry about. I really tried to feel bad about the fact that my parents so easily gave me up, but all I feel is relief. No more dealing with them. No more walking on eggshells. No more feeling like an unwanted outsider in my own family. And honestly, I can't find a single reason to be sad about that. From what my grandparents have told me, the rest of the family knows about what happened. They know how my parents treated me and how they so casually terminated their rights. As a result, most of my relatives are keeping their distance from them for now. I've even had a lot of people reach out to check on me. No one's directly mentioned the situation, but I know that's why they're messaging me, and I genuinely appreciate it. Oh, and in other news, Melissa and Jack officially broke up. Apparently, my message to Jack wasn't the only reason. Ever since their engagement, Melissa had been acting extremely controlling, and Jack was already struggling to deal with it. They had been arguing a lot, and my revelation was just the final straw. That said, I'm not holding my breath. Their relationship has been on and off for years, so I wouldn't be surprised if they somehow found their way back to each other. But honestly, that's none of my business anymore. What actually matters is that I finally get to live my life on my own terms. No more toxic family, no more feeling like I don't belong. My best friend and her parents have been amazing, and I'm genuinely happier than I've ever been. Even my other friends have noticed the change. They've told me that I used to be constantly stressed out, and now, I seem so much more relaxed. And you know what? They're right. I finally feel free.